For 37 years, she had studied wildlife behavior, but nothing had prepared her for this moment. The bear, a magnificent creature standing nearly 9 feet tall, held something precious in her mouth. A tiny, whimpering cub, barely 3 weeks old. What struck Elena most wasn't the bear's imposing presence, but the deliberate gentleness in her movements. The mother bear, whom Elena would later name Ursa, approached with calculated steps, her dark eyes never leaving the human researcher. There was no aggression in her posture, no territorial warning. Instead, there was something Elena had never witnessed in decades of wildlife observation: desperation mixed with hope. The cub in Ursa's mouth was dying. Elena could see the labored breathing, the unnatural stillness that spoke of serious illness. For reasons that defied every instinct both species had evolved over millennia, this apex predator had chosen to seek help from her greatest enemy, humanity. Elena's hands trembled as she slowly reached for her veterinary kit. Every movement was deliberate, non-threatening. She spoke in soft, measured tones, not because she believed the bear understood her words, but because somehow, in this impossible moment, communication transcended language. The bear's response was equally extraordinary. She gently placed the cub on the ground between them and stepped back, her massive form a protective sentinel. As Eleanor examined the cub, she discovered a severe respiratory infection that would have been fatal without intervention. The mother bear watched every movement, every injection, every careful manipulation of her offspring. Trust, Elena realized, was being built molecule by molecule, breath by breath. This wasn't just medical, a treatment. It was the first tentative step towards something revolutionary. The healing process took weeks. Each day, Ursa would bring the cub to Elena's camp, wait patiently during treatment, and carry her young one back to the safety of the woods. But gradually, the distance between human and bear shortened. Elena would find herself working mere feet from a creature that could end her life with a single swipe of massive claws. The breakthrough came when little Coda, as Elena named the cub, took his first healthy breath without assistance. In that moment, Ursa did something that would haunt Elena's dreams with its profound beauty. The great bear touched her massive paw to Elena's hand, a gesture so human, so filled with gratitude, that it shattered every preconception about the emotional capacity of wild creatures. Word of this impossible partnership spread through the scientific community like wildfire. Some called it anthropomorphism, others dismissed it as coincidence. But Elena knew better. She had witnessed the birth of something unprecedented, a conscious choice by a deadly predator to trust rather than fight, to seek peace rather than maintain the ancient war between human and wild. The forest around Elena's camp began to change. Other creatures, drawn by some primal understanding of the sanctuary being created, started appearing at the edges of human space. Not to attack, not to flee, but to observe. The age-old contract between predator and prey, between wild and civilized, was being rewritten by the simple act of choosing trust over fear. 6 months after Ursa's first approach, Elena's small research station had become something unprecedented, a neutral ground where the impossible was becoming routine. The transformation wasn't gradual, it was revolutionary. A family of wolves, led by a scarred alpha named Ghost, had begun bringing their injured pack members to the camp. A territorial mountain lion, Scar, started leaving prey at Elena's doorstep, not as a threat, but as payment for the antibiotics that had saved her twins from infection. But with this miraculous development came an unforeseen challenge. The outside world had taken notice, and not everyone celebrated this new paradigm. Military officials, trophy hunters, and fear-mongering media outlets painted Elena's work as dangerous naivety. "Predator sanctuary threatens local community," screamed headlines. Government officials demanded the immediate relocation or elimination of the dangerous congregation of apex predators. Elena found herself caught between two worlds, the natural sanctuary she had helped nurture, and the human civilization that viewed it as an existential threat. The predators, meanwhile, seemed to sense the growing tension. Their behavior shifted from mere trust to something resembling protective alliance. When government vehicles approached the camp, the animals would position themselves strategically, not aggressively, but as clear guardians of their shared space. The crisis reached its peak when a team of wildlife management officials arrived with tranquilizer guns and relocation cages. Elena stood at the center of her camp, surrounded by creatures that should have been her executioners but had become her family. Ursa and her now healthy cub flanked her left side, while Ghost's pack formed a protective semicircle to her right. Above them, a golden eagle named Valor perched on the camp's radio antenna, his keen eyes scanning for threats. Dr. Vasquez called Agent Morrison the lead wildlife officer. These animals are exhibiting unnatural behavior. They're a danger to themselves and the community. We need to relocate them immediately. Elena's response came not in words, but in action. She knelt beside Coda, now a strong and playful young bear, and the cub immediately nuzzled against her with the trust of a child seeking comfort from a parent. The gesture was impossible to misinterpret. This wasn't Stockholm Syndrome or anthropomorphic projection. This was genuine interspecies bonding. They're not exhibiting unnatural behavior, Eleanor replied, her voice steady despite the tension. They're evolving beyond their instincts. They've chosen peace over aggression, cooperation over competition. Isn't that what we've always claimed makes humanity superior to other species? Our ability to choose reason over instinct. The standoff lasted 3 hours. During that time, something remarkable happened. The animals maintained their protective positions, but showed no aggression whatsoever. They simply existed as a unified community, demonstrating through their very presence that the ancient paradigm of predator versus prey, wild versus civilized, was not an immutable law of nature, but a choice that could be consciously altered. When additional media crews arrived, they witnessed not a dangerous confrontation, but a profound demonstration of interspecies cooperation. The images broadcast worldwide weren't of snarling beasts and terrified researchers, but of a young woman sitting peacefully among creatures that had chosen to trust rather than hunt, to protect rather than predate. The government team withdrew without taking action, but Elena knew this was only the beginning. The world had seen proof that the most fundamental assumptions about predator-prey relationships could be challenged. The question now wasn't whether this peace could last, but whether humanity was ready to accept a new definition of coexistence. The harsh winter that followed tested every bond Elena had helped forge. Food became scarce, and primal instincts whispered seductive promises of easy prey. The camp's harmonious community faced its greatest challenge, not from human interference, but from the fundamental drives that had kept these species alive for millennia. Elena watched nervously as Ursa's natural hibernation instincts warred with her commitment to the camp community. The great bear had lost significant weight, her thick coat beginning to thin. Yet each morning she would make her patrol around the camp's perimeter, as if guarding against threats that might disturb this fragile peace. The conflict was visible. In her eyes, deep, intelligent, but clouded with the confusion of instincts pulling in opposite directions. The wolves faced an even greater trial. Ghost's pack had grown by 3 members during the autumn months, and hungry wolves with pups were evolution's most ruthless killers. When a group of deer wandered close to the camp, seeking shelter from a fierce snowstorm, Elena held her breath. The deer, driven by desperation, had entered the sanctuary hoping the presence of humans might deter predators. a gamble that would have been suicidal anywhere else on Earth. For 48 hours, predator and prey coexisted in spaces separated by mere yards. Elena provided food for everyone, protein-rich supplements for the carnivores, hay and grain for the deer. But she knew she was fighting against millions of years of evolutionary programming. The wolf's eyes tracked every movement of the deer with predatory calculation, while the deer remained in a state of constant, exhausted alertness. The crisis moment came when one of the deer, weakened by malnutrition and stress, collapsed near the wolf's resting area. Elena rushed to provide medical care, but Ghost approached the fallen deer first. Time seemed suspended as the alpha wolf stood over the vulnerable prey animal, powerful jaws inches from a graceful neck that would provide desperately needed sustenance. In for his pack, Elena knelt between wolf and deer, her hands working to stabilize the animal's condition while her mind raced through possibilities. This was the moment that would define everything. Would the carefully constructed peace shatter under the pressure of survival, or would these apex predators continue to choose cooperation over carnage? Ghost's decision came not as a dramatic gesture, but as a simple stepping aside. The alpha wolf moved away from the fallen deer and positioned himself at a respectful distance, his pack following his lead. The message was clear, even in the face of hunger and instinct, the choice to trust would be maintained. But the test wasn't over. The deer, upon recovering, faced their own moral choice. They could flee, returning to the familiar world of constant vigilance and predator-prey dynamics. Instead, led by a wise old doe Elena called Sage, they chose to remain, not just to shelter from the storm, but to actively participate in the community that had protected them. The transformation was subtle, but profound. The deer began alerting the camp to external threats, their sensitive hearing and wide-angle vision serving as an early warning system. The wolves, in turn, used their territorial instincts to patrol the camp's borders, driving away less enlightened predators who might threaten the sanctuary. When spring arrived, Elena realized she was no longer observing an experimental community. She was part of an evolved ecosystem where traditional roles had been consciously redefined. Predators had become protectors, prey had become partners, and humans had found their place not as dominators, but as facilitators of an unprecedented harmony. The outside world continued to watch with mixture of amazement and suspicion, but within the camp, a new form of civilization was taking root, one based not on the conquest of nature, but on the conscious choice to transcend the limitations of instinct through the power of trust. 2 years into what the media had dubbed the miracle of Sanctuary Valley, Elena faced a challenge that threatened to destroy everything she had helped build. A series of brutal attacks by rogue predators in surrounding areas had inflamed public fear and political pressure. These weren't members of her peaceful community, but traditional apex predators operating under the old paradigms of territorial aggression and survival through strength. The irony was devastating. The very success of Elena's sanctuary had created a target. Politicians and fearmongers pointed to the attacks as evidence that predators couldn't be trusted, that Elena's work was a dangerous delusion that put human lives at risk. The sanctuary's residents found themselves bearing the collective guilt for the actions of their unenlightened cousins. Elena stood in her camp's center, surrounded by creatures that had become more than research subjects. They were family. Ursa, now followed by 2 healthy cubs born in the sanctuary, showed signs of stress she hadn't exhibited since those first tentative days of trust-building. Ghost's pack had grown to 11 members, but their usually confident postures were marked by the tension of being constantly judged for the actions of other wolves. The government's ultimatum was clear: The sanctuary would be disbanded, and the animals would be relocated to separate facilities or, in some cases, eliminated as potential threats. Elena had 1 week to comply or face federal charges for endangering public safety. "We've given them everything," Elena whispered to Ursa, stroking the great bear's massive head. "We've proven that peace is possible, that trust can overcome instinct, but the world isn't ready to believe in miracles." What happened next would be remembered as either the most touching demonstration of interspecies loyalty in recorded history, or the most elaborate case of anthropomorphic projection ever documented. The animals, sensing the impending dissolution of their community, began displaying behaviors that seemed almost like mourning rituals. The wolves howled together in harmonies that lasted for hours, their voices carrying across the valley like a funeral dirge for the dying dream of coexistence. The deer gathered in circles, touching their heads together in what appeared to be councils of grief. Even the birds participated, with ravens and eagles perching together in unprecedented displays of unity across species lines. But it was the bears that provided the most heartbreaking demonstration. Ursa approached Elena with her 2 cubs and performed a gesture that shattered the researcher's professional composure. The great bear gently pushed her cubs toward Elena, then lay down in a position of complete vulnerability, belly exposed, throat accessible, in a pose that among bears signified absolute trust and submission. The cubs, following their mother's lead, climbed onto Elena's lap, as if seeking comfort from a parent. The message was unmistakable. These apex predators were entrusting their most precious possessions, their young, to the human who had shown them that trust could be more powerful than fear. Media crews arrived to document the sanctuary's final days, expecting to capture the dangerous folly of humanizing wild predators. Instead, they witnessed something that challenged every assumption about animal consciousness and emotional capacity. The footage showed creatures capable of grief, loyalty, and sacrifice, choosing to remain with their human family even as freedom beckoned from the surrounding wilderness. The images sparked a global conversation about the nature of consciousness, the possibility of interspecies communication, and humanity's responsibility to transcend its role as nature's conqueror. Scientists, philosophers, and ordinary citizens began asking uncomfortable questions about what it meant to be civilized, and whether true civilization might require learning from these wild teachers rather than dominating them. Elena faced the most difficult decision of her life. She could fight the government order, risking legal consequences that might destroy her career and reputation. Or she could comply, potentially sending her family back to a world that might no longer accept them, where the trust they had learned might make them vulnerable to humans who still operated under the old paradigms of fear and domination. The choice, she realized, would define not just her own future, but the future of human-animal relationships across the globe. Elena's decision came not from her rational mind, but from her heart, a heart that had been fundamentally transformed. By 2 years of unprecedented interspecies bonds, she would not abandon her family, regardless of the personal cost. But her choice was made easier by an unexpected development that would change the course of human-animal relations forever. Dr. James Running Bear, a renowned ethologist and member of the Lakota Nation, arrived at the sanctuary with a proposal that seemed impossible. His tribal council, working with an international coalition of indigenous leaders, environmental scientists, and progressive politicians, had secured temporary protected status for the sanctuary under a groundbreaking interpretation of indigenous rights and ecological preservation laws. "Your work here has awakened something that my people have always known," Dr. Running Bear explained to Elena as they walked among the peacefully coexisting predators and prey. "Animals are not resources to be managed or threats to be eliminated. They are relatives, teachers, partners in the great web of existence. The dominant culture has forgotten this, but your sanctuary has reminded the world of what was always possible. The legal protection bought time, but more importantly, it provided a platform for expanding the sanctuary model. Within 6 months, similar communities began forming across North America and beyond. Not as artificial constructs imposed by humans, but as natural expressions of evolved consciousness among creatures ready to transcend their traditional roles. The transformation wasn't without its challenges. Many attempts failed, some spectacularly. Traditional predators, conditioned by millennia of survival through aggression, couldn't always make the leap to cooperative coexistence. But enough succeeded to prove that Elena's sanctuary wasn't a miraculous anomaly. It was a glimpse into a possible future for life on Earth. Ursa's cubs, now young adults, became ambassadors to other bear communities, somehow communicating the principles of peaceful coexistence to their wild cousins. Ghost's pack split into smaller groups that established new sanctuaries across the continent. The deer, led by the wise sage, developed complex warning systems that protected multiple species from genuine threats, while maintaining the trust that made their communities possible. Elena found herself at the center of a movement that transcended her wildest scientific dreams. The Predator Peace Project, as it became known, wasn't just changing animal behavior, it was transforming human consciousness. Children who visited the sanctuaries grew up with fundamentally different assumptions about the relationship between civilization and nature. They saw cooperation where previous generations had seen only competition, partnership where others had seen only domination. 5 years after that first desperate morning when Ursa approached with her dying cub, Elena stood in what had become a thriving village, where the boundaries between wild and civilized had been consciously dissolved. Human researchers, indigenous wisdom keepers, and evolved predator communities worked together to create something unprecedented in Earth's history, a truly integrated ecosystem where each species contributed according to its unique gifts. The world beyond the sanctuaries remained largely unchanged, still operating under the old paradigms of fear and domination. But within these islands of evolved consciousness, a new form of civilization was taking root. One based not on the conquest of nature, but on the recognition that humanity's highest purpose might be to facilitate the conscious evolution of all life. As Eleanor watched Ursa's grand cubs playing with human children under the watchful but relaxed eyes of their great-grandmother, she realized that they had achieved something more profound than interspecies cooperation. They had proven that consciousness itself was evolving, that the capacity for trust and peace was not limited to humans, but was a potential inherent in all sufficiently complex life forms. The story of Sanctuary Valley became more than a scientific breakthrough or a conservation success. It became a proof of concept for what Earth could become when its inhabitants chose trust over fear, cooperation over competition, and love over the ancient tyranny of survival through strength alone. The predators had chosen peace, and in doing so, they had shown humanity a path to its own evolution.